Hello, time for a Man in Great book review. Today's book is Lost Cities, Beauty and Desolation by Jullian Beecroft, published by Flame Tree in 2017. It's 192 pages. Jullian Beecraft is an art historian who's written books about Monet, Renoir, and Salvador Dali, and he's also written a cultural history of London. In this book, this coffee table book, he looks at lost or abandoned cities. And he writes three rather lengthy essays, which are actually very well written, very poetic and lyrical, on the subject of lost cities. The first essay is on ancient places, the second one on ghost towns, and the third one on disaster zones. And each essay is accompanied by a large number of really beautiful full-color photographs. This book is both beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. Let's take a look at some of the illustrations in here, and you'll see what I'm talking about. In the first chapter on ancient places, he talks about the appeal that people have for lost ruins. This, for example, is a really nice photograph of an amphitheater in Turkey, an ancient Roman amphitheater abandoned, over 2,000 years ago. But it's not just about Roman and Greek ruins. This is a panoramic photograph of Machu Picchu, the famous ruined city in Peru. Talks about what happened in all these cases. Of course, the fall of the Roman Empire, and in the case of the Incas, it was the Spanish invasion that destroyed their culture. Here is the great citadel in Zimbabwe in southern Africa. Another empire that fell due to wars with other tribes. And then here we have, let's see, let me double check on this here. Yes, this is an abandoned temple in Cambodia. See this here, which is sinking beneath the water. There's a whole section here on ruins that have been submerged over time. And so he goes through various reasons why these ancient things were abandoned, ancient sites were abandoned. Then the second chapter, the second essay, is about ghost towns. And in the case of ghost towns, a lot of them rose up quickly as mining towns. And when the ore played out, they were abandoned. Here we have this is a city or a ghost town in Texas called Terralingua, which was founded as a mining lead, and when the lead played out, people left, and now there's a bunch of abandoned buildings there. Because of the dry weather, they haven't deteriorated very much. Here's another city, a little ghost town in Texas that was on Route 66, the famous road that went from Chicago to Los Angeles and went through different areas through the Midwest. And when Route 66 was closed down and replaced by the interstate, many of these towns that were on Route 66 dried up and blowed away because nobody went there anymore. And here's an example of an abandoned car and abandoned house there. Then we have a mining town in Alaska, which again was abandoned in the mid-20th century when the ore played out and the buildings are still there and slowly falling apart. And then other examples are cities that are abandoned due to warfare. Here is the bobsled run in Sarajevo, which is now part of Bosnia-Herzegovina, which was originally part of Yugoslavia. All the Olympic sites in Sarajevo were abandoned during the civil war that broke out between the Croats and the Serbs in the 1990s, and all this stuff is in ruins now. So they spent all that money building these elaborate Olympic facilities, and they've all fallen into ruin because of warfare. Other cities become ghost towns because of economic downturns. Here is probably one of the more bizarre ones. This is what looks like a small English village. This is actually a suburb in Shanghai, China, that was built to look like an English village. But during the economic downturn in China, all these buildings are empty. There's hardly anybody that lives here because they can't afford the rent. And so this Shanghai continues to maintain this empty set of buildings, hoping that eventually the economy will pick up enough to where people will want to move in here. So these are all this is a ghost town sitting in a suburb of one of the biggest cities in the world. So very strange. And there's cities like that all over China. And we even have ghost towns similar to that in the United States. Here are a bunch of abandoned, crumbling buildings in Gary, Indiana, once a major steel industry town. When the U.S. steel industry declined, Gary declined in population. I think it's only about a third as many people living here as there were in Gary as there were 40 years ago. And so many of the buildings, people moved out and just abandoned their homes, and they've just fallen into ruin. And then there are some cities that were abandoned because of natural disasters. Here is a town in Chile that was buried by volcanic ash. A nearby volcano erupted and buried the city, or buried the town in ash. And so some of the buildings are still there, but they're slowly sinking into the ash and abandoned. Then we have these buildings are some abandoned apartment buildings in China that were deemed unsafe to live in after a major earthquake occurred there about 15 years ago, and the buildings are still sitting there, and the government has just decided to leave them there rather than tear them down. They think that there might be another earthquake in the area, and so rather than rebuild them, they just left those buildings there to fall apart. And then there's a section on natural disasters. As I was saying, here is a roller coaster. This is at Six Flags, New Orleans. Of course, that amusement park was destroyed by Hurricane Katrina, and the Six Flags company just decided to abandon it. It was already losing money before the hurricane, and they decided just to leave it there. And so this roller coaster is slowly rusting away, and you can't see it in the area, but there's a whole bunch of water just in front of this thing, and so you can't even get to it anymore because the land is sunk. Then there's other cases where human pollution has caused abandonment. This is a small town in Oklahoma that was, you see the church there. This place was abandoned because of pollution. Mining polluted the drinking water, and there were toxic levels of lead and selenium and other toxic heavy metals, and the whole town had to be abandoned because the drinking water was contaminated and the soil was contaminated. And they had a high level of kids with learning disabilities and leukemia and so forth because of that. Then we have one of the best known examples of man-made disaster. This is a bunch of apartment buildings in Ukraine. This is in the city closest to the Chernobyl nuclear reactor. The area around there is going to be so radioactive that it will not be possible for humans to live there for about 20,000 years. There's so much high-level radiation in the area. So all these buildings and vehicles were just abandoned almost immediately after the accident. And then the last one here, the most heartbreaking is, of course, warfare. A lot of houses and buildings and places get abandoned because of warfare. This is what looks like a bunch of nice hotel rooms. This is on the island of Cyprus. At one point, this was a set of luxury hotels. You can't really see it very well, but there was a beach here, and this was a major tourist site for wealthy people going to Cyprus and enjoying the beaches. But then a war broke out between Turkey and Greece over Cyprus, and the Turkish army invaded and occupied this area, and the population fled, and the Turkish army occupied and remained there and shut everything down. And so these buildings have been deteriorating for about 50 years now. And the beach is closed, and there's nobody there. So it's kind of as I said, the photographs are quite beautiful, but it's also rather heartbreaking to see how many of these cities were destroyed because of pollution or because of failure to plan ahead, economic downturns, and of course the ancient collapse of empires. And so it's sort of a lesson, an object lesson, that no matter how powerful or big a city is, no matter how successful a civilization can be, it can still collapse. There's no guarantee that any city will last forever. Something can happen, climate change, war, disease, natural disasters, and then your city or your town may wind up later on in a book like this. The book is Lost Cities, Beauty and Desolation. The author is Jullian Beecraft. Jullian Beecraft. This has been another Man and Great book review. Thanks for watching.